In this lesson, we are going to talk about a different way of organizing a data called a stem and leaf plot. We already talked about line plots, which is one way of organizing data. A stem and leaf plot looks a little bit like a line plot. It has some advantages over a line plot, though, and disadvantages that we'll talk about as we're making the graph. One thing about a stem and leaf plot that is very convenient is that a stem and leaf plot lets us organize data. So when we make a stem and leaf plot, when we're all done making a stem and leaf plot, we can see the data organized from least to greatest, which is very nice since we were just talking in the last lesson about mean, median, and mode. We know that some of our calculations, like the median, we have to have the data in order to do that calculation. So if your data is not in order and you have a big data set, something like a stem and leaf plot might be nice because it does get the data in order. So that's an advantage of a stem and leaf plot, is that it's going to put our data in order from least to greatest. We are going to talk about how to make a stem and leaf plot. We're going to walk through the directions for how to make it. While we're walking through the directions, we are going to actually make a stem and leaf plot. So in your notes outline, you have the steps, and below that you have a data set and a big blank space. So we're going to be going back and forth between the steps and this big blank space so that we can actually make a stem and leaf plot together. So a stem and leaf plot gets its name based off of how we work with the data. So one part of the data turns into what's called the stem, and the other part turns into the leaves. Kind of like a tree. You have one stem with a lot of leaves coming off of it. The graph's going to look a little bit like that, which is where the name comes from. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what our stem's going to be and what our leaves are going to be. So to do that, we need to look through the data and we need to figure out the smallest place value in the data. So identify the smallest place value in the data. So if we look at our data, this is why we were going back and forth, all of our data is mostly 2-digit data. We have a couple of 1-digit numbers, but we could make that a 2-digit number if we just put the leading 0 in there to make them all the same length. So that means all of our numbers for the most part have a 1s digit and a 10s digit. So the smallest digit in our data, smallest place, would be the 1s place. So the 1s place of each number, that is going to turn into the leaves of the stem and leaf plot. The remaining part, so that's the first part, first step, check. Second step of the process to make a stem and leaf plot, the remaining part of each number with the leaves removed becomes the stem. So since our numbers have a 1s digit and a 10s digit, if we take the 1s digit out, that means the 10s digit becomes the stem. So we're going to take the 10s digit and we are going to list them out in a single column up and down. And we are going to go from the smallest number at the top to the greatest number at the bottom. And we don't want to skip over any values. Another note that we can add here too is when we're listing out the numbers, we also don't have any repeats. So once a number's in the list, it doesn't need to be in the list again. So it looks something like this. So we have to go through, since for this step, the remaining part of the number, so the stem, that's going to be the 10s digit from each number. So if you look, we have to go through and figure out basically what are all of our different 10s digits. So we've got a 4, another 4, a 5, a 0. So those don't have a 10s digit, so it will be a 10s digit of 0, a 2, a 5, a 3. So if we go through and just look at all of those 10s digits all the way through, we have to figure out what's the smallest and what's the biggest. So if we go through and look, we can see that the smallest 10s digits are going to be in these numbers, the tens digit of 0. The biggest one. So our data ranges all the way up into, so 56 to 58. So those are, we have a bunch of different numbers that have a tens digit of 5. We also have one of 7, which is even bigger. So that's going to be our biggest tens digit. So that means that our stem, or our tens digits, because remember we took out the ones place, have to go from 0 up to 7. So we're going to put them all into a column running up and down. So it's going to look like this. And it says don't skip any values and no repeats. So since the largest is 0, I'm going to start at 0. And I'm just going to start listing numbers out until I get up to 7, which is the biggest one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we don't actually have any data with a tens digit of 6, but we want to list that number out because that's a gap in the data. So by writing out the 6, we'll be able to see the gap, kind of like how we can see gaps in clusters on a line plot. So you don't want to skip numbers, because if you skip numbers, then you're not going to be able to see the gaps in the graph, and we want to be able to see where there's gaps. And then what we do is we just section that off with a line, kind of running like this. So that is the first step of this. So the next step is to add the leaves to the stem and leaf plot. So this part, we use kind of red for the stem step. So that is our stem. So now we want to add our leaves. So the leaves, remember, if you go back up here, these are both steps dealing with the leaves. The leaves is the smallest place value in the data, so that's the ones place. So the thing that we want to remember when we're making this graph, the stems, we do not want any repeats. But when we come over here and we do the leaves, we want to list out the leaf for each piece of data. So our leaves are the smallest place value, or the ones digit. So we're going to go through and we're going to list out the ones digit for all of the data. So if that means there might be repeats in the data. So list that out for all of the data. So if I start going through, it's going to look like this. So my first number is a 42. So that's a tens digit of 4 and a ones digit of 2. So I'm going to put the other part of the number over here. And then I'll keep going. The next number down is a 47. So I would put that next to the 2 because it's also in the 40s, 47. And then the next number, 56, 5, 6, 58, 5, 8. 5 would be 0, 5. So it would be up here. 0, 0. And then I'm just going to keep going. 23, 2, 3. And we are just going to get all of the data in the graph. So you should also be making your stem and leaf plot in your space on your notes outline, which means right now you should be doing this with me so that you have a stem and leaf plot in your notes. Notice too that as I'm putting the numbers in, I'm trying to keep the numbers evenly spaced. So you could kind of see the first numbers all kind of line up, and the second numbers all line up, and the third numbers all line up. So you want to try and keep your data nice and evenly spaced. It's kind of the same idea as making all of the X's on the line plot the same size. And that's the same reason why we want to keep things evenly spaced, is so that we don't mislead people with our data. So try and keep things nice and evenly spaced as you're adding numbers into your stem and leaf plot. And we already put our 75 in there since it was the largest number. We were showing that. So I'm going to cross that one off because it's already in there. So this gives you an idea of how to sort the data out, but we're not done yet. Oh, we have one more number, 35. I almost forgot. We have one last step. Add the leaves to the stem and leaf plot, and then put each row in order. So right now we have the data sorted out, but if we look at the rows, each of these individual rows, the numbers aren't in order. So what we have right now is kind of a rough draft of our stem and leaf plot, but we need to go through and rearrange the numbers so they're in order if they're not already. So 5, 0 should actually be 0, 5. So I'm going to change that to 0 and a 5. 3 and 4 are already in order, so I can leave those alone. 0, 0, 9, 5, 5 should be 0, 0, 5, 5, 9. So I am going to get those in order. And then 2, 7, 5, 5, 5, 9 should be 2, 5, 5, 5, 7, 9. So we're going to put those in order. And then we're going to keep going. So 6, 8, 5, 1 should be 1, 5, 6, 8. So that just needs to be completely rearranged so that it's in order. So that's your last step, is to get it all in order. Now the nice thing about this, the stem and leaf plot is great for putting numbers in order. If you have a really big data set, you have 50 different numbers in your data set, and you don't want to deal with putting them in order one at a time, you can throw all of that data into a stem and leaf plot, and it makes it a lot easier to get data in order. So that's one thing that people like to use stem and leaf plots for, is just to quickly order a data set, because when you're all done, the numbers do end up in order. The last thing that we want is a key, and I'm going to show you what the key looks like. So that is our last step in the process to make a stem and leaf plot. So the key looks like this. So to make the key, first of all, you can use any number you want. So that might be a good reminder to write down. You can use any number. So I'm just going to grab a number somewhere from my data. So I'll grab 45. So whatever number you grab to make your key, you're going to show what that looks like in the graph. So 45 has a stem of 4 and a leaf of 5. So you can kind of see how it looks like a mini stem and leaf plot. And then we're going to show what that number represents. So 4 and 5 represents 45, and the units are minutes. Should also give your graph a title. So you can call it homework time or anything you like. So this is, with a couple of notes added in, a completed stem and leaf plot. Your notes should look like mine, so you should have all of your outline filled in and your steps filled in, and you should have a completed stem and leaf plot example that looks like what you see on your screen now, including your key. Don't forget your key. That is often forgotten with stem and leaf plots, but it's important because it tells us what the units are on the data, so we need that. When you're finished, you're going to go ahead and move on, and you are going to try the U-Try problems, which are going to let you try making a stem and leaf plot, and also let you practice looking at data that's already in a stem and leaf plot to make sure that you understand how to read the graph.